Alright, so Oedipus Complex today. A logical moment which follows, or chronological moment which follows the mirror stage is Oedipus Complex, or the moment of triangulation. As we have looked at the stages of complexes, Winian complex, intrusion complex being mirror stage, and Oedipus complex, followed by castration complex, are four distinct logical moments through which libidinal becoming, if you like, of a human subject or subject to be, because result of this process is the human subject, well, can be discerned within this becoming. It is necessary to understand that these stages are normal and necessary. And however, everything can always go wrong, and that which has gone wrong becomes a new right. Hence, that which doesn't happen within this process, for example, that which doesn't occur in Oedipus complex, leads to a very specific subjectivity, psychotic subjectivity. And, well, that becomes a new normal for a subject. And it's perfectly acceptable. Things exist in samsara in all the abundance. However, let us look at the causality of ordinary, so to speak, development, where all these stages have taken place, which will give us the neurotic structure as eventually, and possibility to transcend the latter. So, let's review that which has been happening at the stages before. First, there is primal repression, right? And portion of the drive pressure, as well as the dissatisfactoriness or discord, very much real organic discord experienced on the level of the body, is pushed away. It is expelled. And this is what engenders something that Freud has formulated as me. Here is my German non-existent, reveals itself. Ausstoßen. Again, excuse my German. Mean the expulsion. So this is the first logical moment which engenders primal repression. In this moment, a certain stimuli of the drive is deemed as bad. Of course, without any language to deem it bad, or without any image to deem it bad as yet. It is before acquisition of language or even the acquisition of imaginary. It is pushed away out of the psyche before it is even inscribed into the psyche, before the things like things presentation, if you remember from the drive lecture, has taken place. So that's what actually gives them place. It's within this fusion, one self, another, an essence subject, and the first other being a mother or whoever else cares for the subject intimately at this stage, at this time, they're fused. Yeah, within this child and the world, it's all fused, it's all one. This moment creates the basic gap within the fusion. Which creates the fundamental division. Yeah, this is the beginning of splitting or division in the subjectivity. That which has been unbearable on the level of the drive and the body is pushed outside. Well, outside, in a abstract outside, one would say, and deemed as unnecessary. So this is a gap which vouchsafes basic fundamental division. And there are, of course, consequences from this moment. Remember, this all happens even before language. Even there, before language, already the first instance of the lack comes to be, because that which has been expelled, well, fundamentally is lacking, or in that which has remained after the expulsion, something is lacking. Definitely that which has been expelled. And this is when, after the expulsion, something fundamentally awesome occurs. The real comes to be. Or the real is introduced into intrapsychic domain. Is introduced. The real is a register of the human psyche, according to Jacques Lacan's formulation of the human psyche. First arises here, with the expulsion in Ostoson. And jouissance, at this level, is fundamentally lost, because it's been expelled. Strictly designated as lost, which establishes the real outside the subject as objet attrakt. Then we have all the relationships within with the partial object through the breast, because what is the drive for the breast for Sakhalin? Well, exactly the drive to appease that. Here, the real of the drive and jouissance, which is lost, by means of the object. Hence, the object in itself carries the appeasing and the jouissance at the same time. Hence, that which then becomes the object of desire in a later life, be it sexual object or fetish or whatever, carries both qualities, right? A desirable yet dreadful jouissance and its possible satisfaction or partial satisfaction. Okay. At this stage, this event of expulsion of the encounter with the real is nominated by Lacan, and actually Lacan, following Freud, is nominated as unary trait. The event of encounter with the real. The singular event of encounter with the real of jouissance is inscribed in the psyche as unary trait. So this level of inscription, remember, psyche is the canvas on which different things are inscribed. First as things presentation, as memory traits, and then as signifiers. So this here is that which precludes all of them to a certain extent. Things presentation, word presentations. This is the event of encountering with the real. Lacan has a parable for this, as imagine a primitive hunter who makes a hunt, comes back to its cave, and makes this type of thing on the wall. Draws a line or scribbles the line on the wall of the cave, which signifies for that hunter an event of a hunt which has taken place. At that primitive time, hunter doesn't yet know how to count and doesn't yet distinguish over time, when there are boom, 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 20, 30, 40 of these hunts have happened. He cannot any longer distinguish or remember what has occurred in each hunt as clearly as it was. So for him, it's just an event of encounter. So this unary trait, its characteristics is that it is before signifier and before image. Before image and signifier. even before the imagos taken from the other, as we have seen from the imaginary stage, before that. Then next trait would be that doesn't signify no content, doesn't signify content of the experience, or the amount of experience, yeah? No content, no count. And no differentiation either, yeah? No, let's say, qualitative difference. However, already at this level, unary trait is the unit of difference, because it has signified that something has come to be. Precisely this gap, this moment of division due to encounter with the real of the drive, the real of displeasure and inchoate chaos of the body, is taken place. Hence, the unary trait just marks pure difference. Pure difference, difference as such. Not qualitative difference, yes, difference as such. And later on, Lacan would say that unary trait is something that is at the foundation of every signifier. Every signifier in itself is the unit of pure difference before its qualitative dimension has come into being. Because qualitative dimension of signifiers, as we will see when we look at the symbolic order more closely, only comes from the context. One and the same word, whatever, a whiteboard or a pen, can signify different things depending on the context within which it is used. However, inherent to signifier is demarcation of difference, that this distinctly is something other from the other signifying element. If that makes sense. So, this here, the unary trait, eventually affirms Ausstoßen, excuse my German, affirms the expulsion in primal repression. Now, so within this act of negation, basically, the expulsion is the negation of the impulse which is causing discord to the sentient materiality of a nascent human individual. That which is causing that discord is negated and dropped out. However, within this negation, there is also internal affirmation of, well, of the event encounter of the real. As we will see later on in certain subjectivities, like autistic subjectivity, this inscription of the unary trait does not take place. Hence, the dimension of difference within the signifier is not accessed within subjectivity, yeah? Which creates its particular phenomenology for autistic subjectivity and its distinct mode of being. But we'll look at it more carefully later on. So here I see that's traits of the primitive hunter, which makes them on the wall. A few traits like this. Marks, marks, marks. Eventually, at some stage, these traits can be grasped in their totality by the psyche or by the attention, which is developing slowly. And when they're grasped in their totality, as many instances of encounter with the real of discord, and this creates shape to this here, yeah, a certain distinct coming to be of the luck. And when this takes shape, when all of the events are grasped in their totality, then they can be named. And what names them is, well, the next instance, they call it a primordial signifier. Primordial signifier. Another name for it, which Lacan has come up with, is this. Jesus Christ, you won't be able to understand what is this. Name of the father. Name of the father, or primordial signifier. So primordial signifier takes that which has been expelled at the level of ostosom in the totality of unary trait and names it. Gives it a designation via the signifier. Normally, signifier, when it comes to primordial signifier, is something which is devoid of meaning. And this is, again, crucial distinction which needs to be grasped, that signifiers are devoid of meaning because, again, they're contextual. However, the signified is full of meaning. Signified is precisely where meaning is. So, meaning content for the primordial signifier is this, and by extension this, the luck which pertains to the real of the drive, the real of jouissance, the real of objet d'attract. Encountered many times via the unary trait, hence then it can be named. Again, this structural category of primordial signifier is crucial because the foreclosure of this signifier, when this signifier hasn't arisen in the field of the other or in the field of the symbolic, well, it causes psychotic subjectivity to come to be instead of neurotic subjectivity. So presence of the name of the father within the psychic structure equals neurotic subjectivity. If there is a unit of difference which names luck, then neurotic subjectivity comes to be. However, perverse subjectivity can also come to be with this, but here this signifier is kinda disavowed. It is there, but it doesn't carry enough weight so that it can name distinctly the luck, name distinctly the real, and designate it as that which is, well, unattainable to a certain extent, thereby breaking the connection between the nascent subject and the first other. So when this comes to be, something takes place, something secondary to this, and let us look now into that. And here we have second logical moment of the process of subjective becoming, which is Bejahung. Again, excuse my German, but Bejahung is the affirmation, isn't it? for those of you who speak German. Affirmation. So as we have seen, there was an instance of affirmation within the Ausstoßung as well, that which pertains to unary trait and the affirmation of pure difference. And Bejahung, affirmation occurs via name of the father, and that's the affirmation of luck as such. And here, this is precisely what constitutes Oedipus complex, the triangulation. Triangulation. If before there was dyadic union between the mother and the child, let's stick to the ordinary terms of development, then now the third party comes into the play. Yeah? That third party, by introducing the primordial signifier, breaks apart the triads, or sorry, that dyad of the mother and the child, through three things. First of which is non, or no, which is famous Freudian, some of you may agree with it or not, prohibition of incest. Because what Oedipus complex comes down to in its mythological content? Well, Oedipus sleeping with his mother, having killed his father, without knowing it. Here we have the head of the child and the mother. They are fused in this, well, web of sensuality. Sorry, not the web, the bubble of sensuality. There is libidinal investment of the one into another. Every child's demand addressed to the mother is appeased through mother's love and attention, with insecure attachments, of course. And father's know precisely breaks this union. Which has consequences. First, it prevents the mother from devouring a child. Devouring. Smothering love. Full libidinal investment of a mother into a child, which is a thing. That is something which gives rise again to perverse and psychotic subjectivities. And as well, further assists at expelling a portion of child's jouissance which has been invested into a mother. In another term, another categories, they would say that this breaks down child's identification with being imaginary phallus for the mother. Expels child's jouissance, which is invested into the mother, thereby breaking child's identification with imaginary phallus. Now, what's this? This term, imaginary phallus. Well, due to this narcissistic primordial fusion with the mother, which, yes, of course, has been nuanced by acquisition of the imago, again, through the mother's desire and love, a child acquires a certain position of omnipotence because it fulfills mother's love to a certain extent. Having received it and having been fulfilled through the mother's image and desire, it also fulfills mother's desire for love. In this state of narcissistic fusion, whatever mother lacks on a level of the unconscious, she attributes to the child. And that gives child this position of omnipotence. So child is everything for the mother at this stage. My dear darling, which is the world. And for the psyche of the child, this creates this undifferentiated wholeness, which at the later stages of development presents certain problematic, because having been identified with imaginary phallus and having thus acquired omnipotence, that means there is no lack. And that is crucial. If there is no lack in the psychic economy, well, the quality of dukkha is rejected. And again, rejection of that, rejection of dukkha, resting quality of reality, which in the psyche is manifest as the rejection of the name of the father, foreclosure of primordial signifier, leads to psychotic subjectivity. Very well. That's that. So father's norm prohibits this. Prohibits child's omnipotent position in relation to the mother. Then there comes child's father's nom, which is a name in French. Nom, or father's name. What does the name do? Well, it signifies mother's desire for the child. And again, this is something that needs to be understood, because before that, mother's desire is enigmatic for a child. What does she want from me? Yeah, it's not clearly understood or not clearly symbolized. It may be felt, sensed, but not articulated. Yeah, there is a sort of a meshwork of epithets and words signifying attention, love, care, etc. But they are not definitive. So this is what name of the father does, the word of the father, which again doesn't necessarily have to be the biological father or a father figure, or even a male subject for that matter. Same-sex couples still can have function of the name of the father, known of the father, without the same gender, doesn't matter. As long as these definitively names what that first other wants. Enigmatic desire of the first other, in this traditional sense we say mother. It is named. For the child it's signified and no longer enigmatic, and that again makes a crucial difference, because for the psychotic subject it remains enigmatic. Yeah? There is no distancing through the signifier. Symbolic order is not structured because this name has not come to be. For neurotic it comes to be and signifies mother's desire as that which can be designated through signifiers and hence be distanced away from, because that enigmatic desire is, well, it's devouring a child. It bewilders a child and causes anxiety, and this is where monolithic anxiety, which we face in the psychotic subject, occurs. So having named it, it becomes manageable through signifiers and distanced away from through signifiers, so it is no longer overwhelming. And then what else we have pertaining to the name of the father, primordial signifier of affirmation of lack? It introduces the gap. The gap. Sorry, it doesn't. What it has introduced the gap was the previous stage, Ausstoßung. The gap here is transformed into the symbolically designated lac. Lac within the symbolic. So these last two, second and third instances, give rise to this, to the symbolic order. Remember, the Ausstoßung stage gave rise to the order of real. In between that, mirror stage, identification with mother's desire and love, gave rise to the register of imaginary. I should say that here was the imaginary. This omnipotence, enigmatic desire, perceived through imagos, pertains to imaginary. But when the signification, father's name, comes to be, naming the gap into the lac within the symbolic, this, well, it gives rise to the symbolic with its inherent phallic logic. Why? Because it now is governed by distinct units of difference, signifiers, which are pretty much phallic, isn't it? Let's see how that phallic logic occurs. So, in Bejahung, the affirmation of lac, name of the father, names mother's desire for a child. So here then, mother's desire becomes signified for a subject, which leads to precisely this, name of the father, and its function in the symbolic order is like this now. Yeah. Other, being a mother's desire, or whatever else as other's desire, is now signified through the nonsensical name, which entails, as we remember, non as well, a prohibition upon enjoyment pertaining to incestual fusion, and the name itself. And this is designated here in the phallus. So here the child's imaginary phallus is transformed into symbolic phallus. Sorry, the identification with imaginary phallus here is transformed into identification with symbolic phallus, and this is precisely the law of desire, which traverses the wave of the signifiers. And yes, the third logical moment of the Biahun is precisely this. Desire has come to be. So here we have others' enigmatic desire, subjected to phallic logic of signification. It is no longer enigmatic. It acquires meaning which can be explained, which can be nailed, so to speak. So this is what she wants from me. This is now known. This is what he wants from me. This is now known. This other than here, within wider society or whatever, can be any other. But what's crucial here is that it is other's enunciation. And enunciation is always laden with resonance. It is the libidinally charged utterance which carries across a demand on the level of the drive from someone other to the subject. So here what phallic logic does, it interprets this demand. Yeah. Interprets enunciating demand. Which has crucial consequences for subjectivization. When this enunciation is not accessed or is avoided, we have autistic subjectivity. Autistic subjects cannot stand others' enunciation because their body is pervaded by the drive pressure which has not been, well, sufficiently expelled due to foreclosure on the level of unary trait. Difference basically has not been entered. There is no demarcation between engulfing drive and the rest. Hence, the enunciation of the other, libidinally charged utterance directed to oneself, is unbearable. Hence, either autistics become mute or they develop a certain shell, this particular way of interaction along the rim of this shell, which we will look at later on. Psychotic subject can stand enunciation and resonance of the other, demand of the other. However, interpretation of it in the phallic logic is not entered because master signifier, primordial signifier, fathers know, has not crystallized within the symbolic. Hence, phallic logic is unattainable. So, phallic logic has no negative connotation, as it may sound. It's just a function, the function of definitive naming. When definitive naming is not entered, everything is enigma. The other's libidinally charged utterance is just that. It's sort of a nagging demand or a persecution. Hence we have paranoid structure within psychosis, as well as the schizophrenic structure within the psychosis, whereby precisely due to absence of the phallic logic, signifiers represent a mesh which then becomes real. This thing sliding of the symbolic upon the real occurs. Okay, so consequences of this event of Biahon. First of all, subjectivization. Subjectivization of the symbolic order. It makes it inhabitable for a subject. Subjectivization of the other. Yeah, this term other, which Lacan uses definitely on a certain level can be equated with symbolic order, on all the plethora of language and culture pertaining to the entire humanity. Big other, basically all of the knowledge that is sustained within the other. So that field of the entire knowledge of the human species becomes subjectivized, becomes inhabitable by a subject via the name of the father. Why? Because, well, the inherent logic that is commonly used by human species in their knowledges and science, etc., unless they are schizophrenic type of sciences, is accessed through this, becoming understood by others, results from here. This is precisely why it is, for a psychotic subject, difficult to be understood by others, because for them, the name of the father has not come to be, hence they cannot access this dimension of shared consensus knowledge, so to speak. Their knowledge is all idiosyncratic knowledge, paranoid knowledge, the knowledge at the level of imaginary. For the neurotic subject, subjectivization of the symbolic order occurs. And as it follows, the orderliness orderliness 2s of the symbolic order achieved. Because the name of the father serves as a structural limit point. Structural limit. Structural limit to meaning. Again, due to father's norm or the prohibition, proliferation of meaning, which again has to do with paranoid knowledge and incorporation of the words and things from the outside world, is sort of, well, the limits put therein. The imaginary thereby is, how you call it? Well, nailed through the point du capiton, or the quilting point. Quilting point. This is again another function of the name of the father. It's a quilting point which nails the production of meaning in the symbolic by means of definitively naming something, definitively naming others' desire, thereby putting stop to proliferation of different knowledges, which are schizoteric knowledges oftentimes, via distinct naming what is precisely that thing. So that creates order within the symbolic. Order of hard sciences, formulaic type of order, mathematical definitive formulations pertain to this. This psychoanalytic theory with its orderliness, also thanks to the name of the father, right? The third consequences is that now jouissance is attainable through the law of desire. The law of desire. Here desire, it is here. Through phallic logic can be expressed by addressing one's demand to the other, not to the mother anymore, not to the first other, but to the second other, in case of father, and to the big other, which father stands for. Hence, through the modes of behavior, modes of livelihood, which are designated by the big other, by the cultures and the way things go, the way people live in the world. The dimension of the drive, the dimension of the enjoyment pertaining to the drive can be attained through the law of desire, through the particular mode of behavior, and life, language, communication, acquisition of knowledge, etc., and acquisition of partners and relationships through the phallic logic of the law. Here, by means of generating this desire directed towards the big other, gradually on the inverted ladder of the law of desire, as Lacan put it, the dimension of extimacy, which has to do with primordially expelled quota of the drive tension. Dimension of extimacy, which is a strange word, I know. Extimacy, the most intimate core pushed on the outside of subjectivity in the logical moment of primal repression. Why? Well, it's because it's most intimate. It's the libidinal enjoyment coupled with dread, but yet pushed on the outside. It is accessed through the law of desire. It is intimate exteriority. Of the object of desire, of objet attrait, petit attrait, small other. Within others, through phallic logic, the neurotic subject can access that which is extimate to one's own interiority, the drive, the enjoyment pertaining to jouissance. This can only come to be through acquisition of symbolic order via name of the father, and it being ordered by the name of the father. In the psychotic subjectivity, this is not extimate. This is intimate as it is. It is engulfing a subject, impinging from within and from without at the same time. Because object attrait has not crystallized in the field of the other for a psychotic subject, as well as for the autistic subject. It is within. There are slight differences in structuration, which we'll look at later. Most important to understood that this is, in Bejahung, the affirmation, that the lack is affirmed, and hence symbolic order comes to be. Now, what does this entail in terms of the subjective becoming? Well, we can say that the ideal ego, acquired through the mirroring identification with the first other, now moves towards the ego ideal. Why? Because now the child is looking to the second other, which has provided the name and the prohibition on incestual fusion. I'm looking for the second other for answer, and that second other incarnates the ego ideal. So we can put here is that ideal ego is that way I want to see myself. The way I want to see myself. The ideal ego is the way I want the other to see me. And the other would be the second other. Which then is transposed on the first other as well, because the phallic logic incorporated from the field of the other is now used in order to interact with the first other. The way I want other to see me. reaching to the field of the other for answer enables the subject to construct ideal outside of oneself, ideal which is no longer reliant upon the somatosensory plethora associated with the imagos taken from the first other, but now it is associated with the images, words, concepts, ways of behavior, patterns of culture, which can be discerned within the field of the other. So here this is an ideal copy-pasted, well, this one was copy-pasted from the first other, from the mother. This one is copy-pasted from the second other, and hence has greater variety. It's more flexible, more pliable. Again, this is the movement from the very rigid sort of a field of identification to a more pliable field of identification. Because here the desire can slide and slither on the law of the signifiers, and hence introduce varieties of subjectivities to dispose. However, from here comes something else. Superego. And this is a demand which comes from the field of the second other to be seen in a specific way. Demand to be seen in a perfect way, let's say. So it's the demand which comes from the field of the other, the demand for perfection. So child's demand for appeasing the internal pressure passes through the second other, father or whatever, and acquires certain signifiers, certain words, concepts, patterns of culture, whatever. Gradually, this field of patterns starts to refine. As it refines, it congeals into something that is, well, very imposing, very nagging maybe, and again, very definitive. It doesn't necessarily have to do with a particular way that the father interacts with the child, as in a very demanding way or in a very prohibiting way, but it has to do with the child's very ideal. So here the loop kind of closes itself, and this is twofold. The ideal ego still persists, remember, yeah? The imaginary hasn't been eliminated, eradicated by the acquisition of the symbolic. Ego ideal expands the ideal ego, but ideal ego still persists. And it's here transposed onto the field of the other, from where the demand which vouchsafes that still sense of wholeness pertaining to fusion or identification on the very level of imaginary, it persists. So we here in the field of superego, we want to incorporate certain styles of life, modes of behavior, fields of knowledge, patterns of, I don't know, articulation, whatever, that please this ideal, which can be already now a mixture of ideals of the mother and father, the family, the national ideal, whatever, kinship ideal. They are all congealing here and imposing a demand upon a subject's well-being. According to this demand, then subject life is structured. They choose particular lines of education, particular careers, particular lifestyles, and etc. Modes of self-care and all sorts. Looks come from here. If that is, well, say, less imposing, then ego ideal has more room to breathe, more flexibility within it. There is interchangeability within the symbolic that can be accessed. However, if the identification with familial dynamics is strong, then superego will be to the forefront. And well, this is how human differences within the human societies persist through imposing demands existing on the level of basic psychic organization. It's very hard to get away from it, isn't it? Well, ideal ego to ego ideal to superego notwithstanding, there are certain important consequences of the triangulation that need to be reiterated. So this is triangulation. Basically, Biahun has affirmed the lack within the other, which leads to difference between sexes, sexual difference, and generations is introduced into the psyche. Here, child starts to understand that the sensuality-based fusion with the first other is no longer an option, and there is also previous generation which this first other addresses to fulfill her lack or their lack, and this generation needs to be counted with, and different sexes have to be counted with. Second, there is a differentiation between one's own and others' desire. Differentiation of one's own and others' desire. So remember, in the presubjective fusion, or the fusion pertaining to the mirror stage, child's desire and desire of the first other are one. Whatever mother wants, child wants too. Yeah. Or whatever child wants is appeased by the mother, and hence through that appeasing is now desired by a child. See? Through this breaking up of the dyad through triangulation pertaining to Oedipal stage, which, as we know, runs from about 18 months till 5 years of age, one can crystallize one's own desire, which is no longer dependent on the mother's interpreting, mirroring. Why? Because now it is addressed to the second other, and hence slides along the sledge of the signifiers through language, through culture, through basically the variety of choices available. And hence the third consequence, the possibility of choice. Before, there wasn't any possibility of choice. Whatever other mirrors, child appropriates. Now there is possibility of choice. Different dimension of the culture and society and the language can be accessed now. And here, this is where education starts to take part. Child can now choose one's own likes and dislikes through within the fields of whatever, entertainment, reading, etc., arts, crafts, interests, etc. Why? Well, precisely now, because desire is sliding in a chain of signifiers. Because it now slides in a chain of signifiers, it can manage the anxiety pertaining to the drive with continuous addressing of the field of the other. Yeah? Second other and the big other, the other of culture. Through that continuous addressing, there is a choice, a possibility that the realization can be attained that lack cannot be fulfilled. And I would say this realization is exclusive for neurotic subjectivities only. And previous subjectivities possess internal innate conviction that the lack can be fulfilled. Particularly in the perverse subjectivity, it is very clear that because subject is identified with imaginary phallus and thus omnipotent and hence is the answer for the lack. In neurotic subjectivity, there is understanding that despite all the efforts of projecting the desire in the field of the other, it doesn't yet fulfill lack. It can momentarily appease it, but never completely. And as we have already seen, consequence of that, or actually the reason for that, is because symbolic phallus has overrides imaginary phallus. The imaginary identification is nuanced and overridden by symbolic sliding of the law of desire along the signifiers, which has a major consequence for the psychic economy. Separation anxiety which is precisely the monolithic anxiety which we face within the psychotic and perverse subjectivities, that has to do with not being able to fulfill the demand of the other or ideal presented by the other. Let's write it down. Due to not being able to fulfill first other's ideal, is now transformed into signal anxiety. Separation anxiety into signal anxiety. And signal anxiety has to do, well, with just proximity of the real. Here, when in the state of fusion, not fulfilling ideal presented by the first other amounts to being plunged into the real of dukkha, pertaining to discord at the primordial level of subjectivity. Here, because distancing has already occurred due to triangulation and introduction of signifier, only signal anxiety is present. Hence the neurotic subjectivity is, well, more sort of stable, I would say, than psychotic. Because here, when the ideal is collapsed within the psychotic subjectivity, psychotic break follows. Here, when proximity of the real is dawning, because ideals still collapse within the neurotic subjectivity as well, only signal anxiety will arise, which is not as overpowering and thwarting as the psychotic anxiety. Yeah. Precisely because of that freedom, certain degree of freedom from, I'll write mothers, M enclosed in the brackets, because it can be whatever, parent, from mothers jouissance. Again, mother's jouissance is a threat to a child, which again precisely causes anxiety. When it is demarcated from, by means of the triangulation, it is no longer a threat. Because now a child has entered the language and the symbolic, whereby it can manage one's jouissance while addressing the culture and language. And precisely within language, meaning can take shape. And this is meaning different from the meaning we find in the enigmatic kind of equivocation presented in the psychotic delusional metaphor, whereby meaning is laden with jouissance. Here, meaning is free from jouissance. Why? Well, because desire slides along the chain of signifiers. Because signifiers can now nail, point du capiton, quilt the fields of meaning. So the meaning becomes structured and organized. And how do you write it down? Structuration. Of enunciating presence of the other. Wire, desire, and language. So here language is already endowed with capacity to definitively name things, even things which are denoting vague, enigmatic things having to do with this libidinal tension, the sexuation, etc., sexuality. And to recap all these consequences of triangulation which are happening through Oedipus Complex, which gives us neurotic structure precisely. To recap the chronological moments of this process, let's once again return to the first austoson, whereby initial expulsion of the drive takes place, engenders the repetition of unary trait. Unary trait, inscription on repeat. Here encounters with the jouissance repeated, which in turn engenders Biahon. Naming of the lack. Naming of the lack engenders desire, or desire sliding the chains of signifiers. That's right. Desire in the chain of signifiers. Which vouchsafes the access of a subject to the symbolic order. So here we have the real. This here The real. The real first comes to be and inscribed in the symbolic, into the psychic economy. Somewhere in between. There comes imaginary with the mirror stage. Via mirror stage. And here we have symbolic. So this is how eventually 3 registers of the psyche come to be via the Oedipus complex. Well, the real comes prior to even mirror stage, then mirror stage comes about, then the repetition of the unary trait engenders the possibility to grasp all the totality of encounters with the real, which are then, precisely through the Oedipus complex and the biahun, a formation of the lac, the naming of the lac, gives rise to desire slide in the chain of signifiers, which is the symbolic. From here we can talk about Borromean knot and the unity of 3 registers, etc. Not to say that in other subjectivities apart from neurotic these registers do not come to be. Of course they do, but they are entwined in a different fashion. This is all Lacan's play with the knots and etc. Topology comes into place in an attempt to symbolize in a mathematical fashion these interrelationships between psychic registers within different subjectivities. Okay, so crucial things to understand that there is a logical progression and even chronological progression within the becoming of a subject. And the Oedipus complex, which is located here on this stage, biahun, is one of the logical moments. So we shall continue looking at the object cause of desire from here on in the next lecture. Thank you.